Welcome to this episode of the Harpreet Singh Show. I'm your host Harpreet Singh from Surrey, British Columbia, Canada. In today's program, I have a guest in person sitting in my studio, Garnet Genuis. He's the Member Parliament from Fort Saskatchewan, Sherwood Park, and today we'll be talking to him about a number of issues which are related to all of us and we are concerned about those. Our focus will be our talk on Afghanistan, religious freedom, personal rights, and this gentleman has been an advocate for all this for a long time. So it's a pleasure to have him in the studio, and let's continue with the discussion. Garnet, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you, Harpreet.
Thank you. So I'd like to start off with Afghanistan. Our focus today is on Afghanistan, and I remember last year you had written a letter to the Prime Minister also, and you had raised this issue. And you have been a vocal supporter of the Hindus and Sikhs who are in minority in Afghanistan, and apart from what all has been happening over here. So could you take us on this journey as to what has happened in Afghanistan, and have we as Canadians come to the forefront at the right time to save those people, or you feel that the government has failed them?
Unfortunately, it's too late for a lot of people. I mean, obviously there's still effort ongoing, and I don't want to take away from that. But you go back to 6 years. I was first elected in 2015, and in the 2015 election, Conservatives actually had a commitment to create a special program to allow private sponsorship of those minority communities that are in Afghanistan. The first statement I made in Parliament, I became aware of this issue early on. I decided to get involved in it. So the first statement I made in Parliament, December 8th, 2015, was about that issue. And we have continued advocacy, tabled petitions, signed letters. It's been a consistent process of advocacy from the Conservative Party for those 6 years, saying that there should be a special program allowing direct sponsorship. Because the problem is people can get private sponsorship if they are certified as refugees and in a third country, but not if they're facing persecution in Afghanistan and still there. And the government has still done nothing in terms of that call to action around a special program that would have really made a difference. You got to be able to see these crises a little bit before they actually happen, right? I mean, the tension was building, the pressure. There were big challenges for these minority communities long before the current kind of the current kind of apex of the crisis. We should have acted earlier, and it's often too late. So now the government has said, "Oh, we're going to take all these refugees." But if you read the fine print actually talks about Afghan nationals who are in third countries. So they're still thinking third countries. They're not evacuating 20,000 people that are needed. They're not even successfully evacuating Canadians and Canadian partners. Never mind other people that are liable to persecution. So they should have acted much earlier on this. They failed to act, and unfortunately now for many people, it's too late.
What's in stake for those refugees, and especially those still who are behind and who have not been able to come? And as you have been raising your voice for this, and especially private sponsors, there were a lot of people who wanted to be brought over here, and they were coming forward as private sponsors, but nothing happened. So now with the situation settling down a little bit, do you think that they'll have some scope of coming over here or no?
Well, I think it's a very dangerous situation. Obviously, that we know what the Taliban are, right? And the Taliban are trying to present this false image of, oh, we've changed, we've learned. This is all politics and all nonsense. I mean, there are early indications that the substance in terms of the violence on the ground is very extreme, and just as much what it has always been when the Taliban have been able to do that. They have an extreme violent agenda. That's why they're recognized as a terrorist organization. So for all Afghans, but especially for those particularly vulnerable, for women and girls, for members of minority communities, Sikh, Hindu, Christian, ethnic minorities such as Hazaras, it's going to be a particularly challenging time, which is why many people are going to continue to do everything they can to get out.
The geopolitical ramifications of this takeover by the Taliban, especially Pakistan also, yesterday we were seeing they have opened up the borders, and thousands of people are coming to Pakistan. And even those Pakistan Taliban which were in the jails were released by the Talibans when they took over the government. So now what do you feel, what impact that can have on India also, because Kashmir is a major issue, and already we are hearing reports of Taliban penetrating into those areas and creating disturbances?
Yes. So one thing I expect to happen very early on is that the government of China will recognize the Taliban. And to be clear, we do not think that anybody should recognize the Taliban as the legitimate government of Afghanistan. Conservatives have been clear about that. The Liberals have been kind of waffly on that. Canada needs to take a clear, principled stand. But I do expect the government of China to immediately begin trying to deepen their relationship there. And you think kind of strategically about what's happening in the region. The government of China is trying to extend their Belt and Road Initiative, their kind of neo-colonial policy there. In Pakistan, in Afghanistan, they've got a port now in Sri Lanka. So these are obviously significant dynamics that impact India, but they impact our security as well. They impact global security. And I would just say it's just it's the sad irony of this, right, is that inside of China, the government of China is involved in a genocide against Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims. They're absolutely brutal policy towards the Muslim population, and yet outside of the country, they present themselves as extending this hand of friendship to Pakistan, and Afghanistan and other. And it's just so obviously disingenuous, and I think a lot of people see through that. But the Taliban, though a violent terrorist organization, they are following geopolitical trends and trying to manipulate them to their advantage.
Absolutely. We've also talked about Rohingya Muslims in Bangladesh, and you raised a lot of voice in the parliament also. What's the present situation over there now?
Well, so in Burma, there was the military coup, and certainly a worsening situation for human rights across the board. I mean, I think if you could find a silver lining there, it's that there has, I think, been an increase in dialogue and engagement between some of the different kind of anti-military groups. I mean, there was a lot of concern about even the democratic leaders of Burma not doing enough to stand up for minorities such as Rohingya. And now there's kind of an advance in that desire to have a bit of a united front against military repression. But overall, I mean, the situation with the military coup is tragic. It's dire. Now, you mentioned Bangladesh. I mean, there's a very large Rohingya population in refugee camps in Cox's Bazar, and the sad thing there is that you kind of wonder, like, what is the long-term solution for many of these folks, who want to, I mean, ideally they'd be safe to go home, but of course we shouldn't be encouraging that prematurely and before they are genuinely safe and secure to do so. There's different groups that have raised concerns about kids being able to be in school, access to nutrition they need, and so forth. And it's a sad situation when people are kind of semi-permanently in these systems that are supposed to be temporary. But what do you do? And so that's an area as well that I think the international community really needs to turn its attention to. Right.
So, Garnet, you raised these voices in the parliament, but did the government stand up for these people?
I think the government has failed on many fronts in terms of human rights. And so we can talk about specific cases, but we also have articulated a new strong human rights policy across the board that would apply to any situation. So we have spoken out about Rohingya, about Uyghurs, about Afghan minorities, and called for specific policies in each of those cases. As conservatives, we've also put forward our new human rights policy, which has a number of different elements to it. Number one being very strong in combating forced labor, slave labor in our supply chains, preventing products produced by slave labor, like we're seeing with Uyghurs, from making its way into the Canadian marketplace. Limiting the ability of the government to grant waivers, allowing human rights abusers to come to Canada. So if you've been involved in human rights abuses, you're limiting your ability to come to Canada. Expanding and strengthening the Magnitsky Act, so that more people who are involved in human rights abuses will be sanctioned under that act. Requiring the Minister of Foreign Affairs to table an annual report about the work of government on international human rights, so that we can hold the government accountable in terms of what they're doing and not doing on that front. Making it a criminal offense for someone to go abroad and participate in a human rights violation of certain level overseas. So these are some of the tough new measures that we're going to do to really establish Canadian leadership on human rights. And just one other thing to mention on the human rights policy is we are committed to strengthening engagement with diaspora communities here in Canada, recognizing that it's often when you have those people-to-people connections on the ground that you can get the first information about what's happening and really know how to respond effectively. So we've committed to establishing international human rights advisory council advisory mechanism, in particular representative of different cultural and religious communities in Canada, to really facilitate that information and ongoing conversation about how based on what people are hearing through family members, through community ties, what can we do to lead and be allies with those that are facing violence and persecution?
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing your views on these issues. I would like to focus now on Canada. We have seen in the past hate crimes are on the rise in Canada. How much concerned are you about that, Garnet?
Yeah, well, we're very concerned. I mean, I think there are various different factors, that contribute to this, and I think there's a few different things we need to do in response. So, one clear thing is, of course, government leadership. I think our leader's been very clear, very strong about condemning acts of violence that target communities and that target any community, right? I mean, we can't be selective,
Absolutely.
right? Whether it's an attack on a mosque, attack on a gurdwara. We had a case here in Vancouver where a church was burned down. The government can't be selective. The government should be consistent in condemning use of violence in every case, because if you turn a blind eye in one case against one community, not only is that wrong, but that's inevitably going to spread, and other people are going to start. So I think our party has been the most consistent in condemning that violence. We've said as well that the criminal code needs to clearly criminalize incitement to violence, including incitement to violence that takes place online. So we can defend freedom of speech in terms of people having different opinions, people saying I don't agree with your religion, but when it comes to any form of incitement to violence, we need to be very, very clear that's unacceptable. And I guess a final point that I think is important is really separating out discussions of other governments from individuals who come from those communities. So we've seen a rise in anti-Asian racism, for example, and we have to combat that by just being very clear that the government of China does not represent all Chinese people.
Right.
It doesn't represent Chinese Canadians. And just because we have a legitimate objection to what the government of China is doing, that should not spill over in terms of the way that people of Chinese origin are treated here in Canada. And the same is true of other communities, where sometimes if there's if there's a foreign policy issue with another government, the concern is there's a spillover for communities here in Canada, and that should not happen. The government should be clear about making that separation, right? Making that separation between a government and the people.
Right. When you talk about freedom of speech, that has been the hallmark for Canadians. But C10 was brought by this government, and that was the focus was to, kind of choke the voice of the people. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, Bill C10 did not pass. The government, in a bizarre move, calling an early election, essentially killing their own legislation. Doesn't bother me in the case of Bill C10, because I thought that was, there's a lot of problems with that bill. That bill used Canadian content regulation to allow the CRTC to go in and shape social media algorithms. Say, okay, this is more Canadian content, this is less Canadian content. We're going to say you're going to see more of this and less of this in terms of what you're looking at online. And so we took the position that we should respect freedom of speech in Canada, that we can support Canadian content without allowing that kind of social media regulation.
Right. Okay, let's talk a little bit about immigration now. You have also been hearing about immigration issues, especially in areas where South Asian population is more. We are seeing that international students who are coming over here are being exploited. LMIAs are being sold for $50,000 to $80,000, and the immigration system is in a chaos. It's quite interesting that this needs a complete overhaul. So what will the Conservatives do on all these issues?
Yes, very important question. I'm really excited about our immigration policy, of course, and many people have seen it already, but on the first day of the campaign, we released a detailed plan, over 150 pages with policy commitments in many different areas, and people can find it at conservative.ca/plan, but especially there's a section on immigration with lots of really detailed policies. And the mainstream media hasn't covered the immigration changes too much, but they're very significant, and they will have a big impact. So making the immigration system work more efficiently, more effectively, we are going to speed up processing times by simplifying applications, and also by allowing people to pay an expedited processing fee and put all the resources from that fee into expanding processing capacity. So we'll be able to speed up processing, have more people doing the processing at no additional cost to taxpayers. We've also said if people make small errors, inadvertent errors in an immigration application, they should be able to correct those errors instead of needing to resubmit the entire application. So some of these just client service aspects, improving cultural sensitivity training for those doing the processing, having interviews take place online and be recorded so that if there are issues or questions, these things can be reviewed.
Right.
These are some of the the strong client service pieces that we put in place. We're going to extend the tenure of the super visa to 5 years. We're going to fix the problems in family reunification.
Right.
And you mentioned students. We are going to put in place pathways to permanence for those who are in Canada, have connections here, and have established their willingness to work and succeed here in Canada. You mentioned some issues around corruption. We need stronger enforcement as well,
right,
and building up that processing capacity as well as the filming will allow that effective enforcement. We need to obviously invest in this area as well, and then sort of proximate to the immigration system is credential recognition. Very exciting. We've committed to launching a national task force on credential recognition, improving credential recognition. And part of that is we've said needs to include looking at pre-qualification. How can we establish mechanisms, whether through distance learning or partnerships with training institutions in other countries, so that people can get Canadian qualifications and have those qualifications in their hand before they arrive.
Right. That's absolutely true, because right now what's happening is the divide between the immigrants and the citizens over here is increasing. People are feeling the pinch of it, that students who are coming over here, not only are they exploited, but also in the rural areas also we are finding that there is tension which is increasing. So the loopholes need to be plugged so that the better immigration system prevails and everybody who comes to Canada can enjoy the freedoms which we enjoy over here. We'd like to talk a little bit about gangs and violence. That's another major issue which South Asian, and especially in this region, it's a major thing. The government has been paying a lot of lip service, but nothing concrete has been done. Do the Conservatives have a strong plan on this?
Yes, absolutely. More detail on that in the platform as well. I think the Liberals have been paying lip service to, but they've also been focusing on the wrong thing. They've been focusing on law-abiding firearms owners, people who go through the process, get licensed, and the process in Canada for becoming a law-abiding legal firearms owner is very onerous. It's very challenging already. So the people that have gone through that process, they've been thoroughly vetted. And adding more red tape to that side of it isn't really where the problem is.
Right.
The problem is on illegal guns. It's gun smuggling. It's gun crime committed with illegal guns.
Right.
And gang activity as well. So the Liberals, while going after law-abiding firearms owners, they have actually been reducing sentencing. Right. On the other side of the ledger. So we need tough sentences for those that are involved in violent crime. We need some reforms that facilitate prosecution based on gang activity.
Right.
So having a standing list of identified gangs, for example, will reduce the need to prove in every case that a particular organization is a criminal organization. So, so we've proposed a number of real practical legislative changes that will help prosecutors when we seek to actually remove those involved in violent activity from society. And we also need to be looking at some of the causes of this and working with community groups and others to I think we've got a strong plan on the opioid crisis, on helping people that are vulnerable in various ways, and I think that compassionate conservative approach pairs well with also having an effective punitive approach for those who cross the point of being involved in violence.
Right. You are just 34, a youngster who was elected in 2015 as one of the youngest member parliaments. Another issue which youngsters are most concerned about is climate change. And that's a major issue which people want to see some action. We have heard a lot from Mr. Erin O'Toole about this issue. But briefly, if you could tell us a little bit about what is your climate change approach.
Yeah, I mean, our party has a very detailed climate plan. It's part of the platform. We pre-announced it so that people would have time to see it and absorb it. We have a good plan that will work very well. It is different in certain respects from the Liberal plan. One of the key differences is this issue of border adjustment. So right now, the way the carbon tax system works is that you pay it on production in Canada, but you don't pay it if you're producing goods outside of Canada that are sent to Canada. Right. So this just encourages people to set up production on the other side of the border, sell into Canada at a competitive advantage. They're not paying the carbon tax. So why would we create this incentive for people to move out of the country but continue to produce the same emissions? It doesn't help the environment and it hurts our economy.
Right.
So what we've said is we need to have border adjustments for that. If people are producing products at lower environmental standards and selling them into Canada, there needs to be some cost they pay at the border to account for the extra costs that are being paid by Canadian firms to comply with those environmental requirements. So putting in place border adjustments, it helps combat climate change, recognize the global nature of the challenge, but it also protects our economy from the kind of outsourcing that the Liberal plan promotes. So that, I mean, I think ocean plastics is a big issue.
Oh yeah, that's a major issue.
Yeah. And we put forward a private members bill. The Liberals actually opposed it to ban the export of plastic waste to other countries that are less well positioned to manage it effectively.
Right. There are so many things to talk, but time doesn't permit. But one major issue which people are concerned about is cost of living.
Yes.
Inflation is on the rise. Even the basic necessities, it's becoming difficult to even buy groceries for many people. Leave aside the home affordability.
Yes.
So what is the Conservative plan on tackling this major issue?
Yeah. So on the issue of inflation, stop printing money, right? Like get that under control.
Right.
And that's tied to government spending, right? We have to get government spending under control. And the Trudeau government has been trying to push this message that money is free, right?
Yeah.
Well, we're going to give a little more over here, a little more over here. Well, the money comes from us.
Yeah.
And also in the process of printing more, it's getting devalued. The inflation tax. Anyone who holds money, it's becoming less valuable because of the Trudeau government's approach. So we need to get our spending under control. And therefore get costs under control. We've got some other measures around addressing affordability, combating price fixing where it happens, and then home purchasing is a huge piece of the affordability plan, and a lot of it comes down to supply, the availability of housing, and we have a strong plan to very quickly increase the number of housing units available on the market by releasing federal lands, by incentivizing development, by working with municipalities to incentivize increases in density, those kinds of partnerships, but working from a supply perspective. If there's more housing available overall, that makes it a lot easier for people to afford a home.
Right, and of course also banning foreign buyers also. This is what also Mr. Renal talked about. But there is one major thing which people are again concerned about the Liberal government also taxing your original house. How much truth is in that, and what would you like to tell our views about that?
Well, it's very clear that Liberals have talked about this. They've studied it. It's been one of these ideas that they've been teasing about for a while.
Right.
And in this election platform, the Liberals have very openly put out a plan, and they say it's based on flipping houses, right? Like taxing on flipping houses. So you would pay tax on a principal residence under their plan if you sell it within a certain period of time.
Right.
The problem with that is look, people move for lots of different reasons, right? You move to a neighborhood, you think it's going to work out, and something doesn't work out. The school isn't working out for your kids, whatever it is, and so you want to move, right? Well, that's not house flipping. But then suddenly you're aggressively penalized, and it's actually those taxes would apply up to 5 years, so declining in value, but up to 5 years.
Right.
So you've lived in a house for 3 years, and surprise pregnancy, you need a bigger house, you get a job transfer, members of the military who have to move a lot. It's very punitive to say that anyone who lives in a house for less than 5 years is engaged in flipping. I will say just one other thing on this. There's a lot of hypocrisy from the Liberals as well, because you have the Liberal candidate in Vancouver, Granville, it's come out, has been
lots of houses,
flipping and flipping. There's we're used to talking about Liberals flip flopping, but in this case it's house flipping we're talking about, and so they're in one way they're trying to attack in a punitive way those families that just want to move after living in a house for 3 or 4 years for whatever reason, right? Maybe, kids, school, family circumstances, job, whatever. Meanwhile, they've got this candidate who is a master flipper,
and still no action is taken against him. That's interesting, Absolutely. And towards the end, there's one major question which always comes forward. The Conservatives, like you, have been always talking about human rights and personal freedom and talking for the rights of the people, and especially when it comes to immigration also. But the perception that has been put in the minds of the people, especially the South Asian community, by the Liberals is that the Conservatives are anti-immigrants. Finally, what would you like to say on this particular thing?
Well, the evidence is there in our platform, but also in our record. right? We have, we've got a lot of new ideas in this platform in terms of immigration, but let's remember that even in the 10 years when Conservatives were in government last, we had the highest sustained immigration levels in the country's history up until that point. We had very high levels of immigration. We worked to improve the system in various ways. There's a lot more work to do. There are new challenges, new opportunities. But if you look at the history, what happened in the last 10 years, if you look at Brian Mulroney and his advocacy for human rights, if you go back to Diefenbaker, he was really substantially, he was the person that begun the fight for human rights in modern Canada. He brought in Canada's first Bill of Rights. He also substantially removed elements of racial discrimination in the immigration system that prior to that period had considered actual racial criteria in immigration, and he was the leader that really attacked that issue. So if you look at the records of Conservative prime ministers, we haven't governed Canada for as much of its history, unfortunately, but in those times when we've been in government, those have actually been associated with significant progress on immigration and human rights, and that's a record. We need to tell that story. We need to get it out there, but it's a reality of where we're coming from.
Garnet, it was a pleasure talking to you on these issues. Thank you very much, and best wishes for your campaigning. And we hope once the Conservative government gets formed, these issues, what you have talked about, will be really tackled, and people will get some relief from all this. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to be with you and your viewers and part of the important conversation.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.